So to get a little bit more detailed on the agenda today, what we'll look at, we'll go through the application here. I've pulled it up and you should see that sharing in just a second here. We'll go through the application. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the configuration because that's small and we can get that out of the way. And then we'll talk and go into the setup of test plans and basically how to create and structure those plans. And I'll talk a little bit about the workflow and how we move that along. If we've got extra time at the end, I may start the scripting just so that we can get that topic started. But the main focus today is really the app and the usage of the app. Anything else we can get would be extra on top of that. Perfect. So what do we got here? We're looking at ServiceNow. So the main portion of the application is a ServiceNow scoped application. Where this lives in your environment may depend on how we actually roll it out. A lot of companies choose to start to have this in their dev or test environments, and they like to start development in there while they prepare to move that to production. That's a perfectly fine way to work. You can take the tests and move them along. I'll show you the mechanism for how to export and move those tests. But as you're getting ready to roll this out to production, if you want to start development in other environments, that's fine. We do have a mechanism to move those tests along there. Being that it is a scoped app too, the other thing I should mention is that it has no external dependencies on ServiceNow applications. So this does not rely on anything else. It does none of the core tables, none of the custom tables. It's its own, and it's completely standalone. So as far as deploying this or moving this application, everything is self-contained within here. The application has a few sections, as I kind of just mentioned there. The test repository, and we'll come back to this, but this is that place where we create and maintain those tests. That this is where generally you'll be working. We'll put all the scripting and stuff in here. We do have a BDD or behavior-driven development. I'll explain this when we get to the form. I don't think we're going to opt into this, but I want to explain it so you know what it is. And the area for managing that piece of functionality is right here. But again, I think we're going to opt out of that just for now. If we want to come back to that, we can. The configuration, of course, is the configuration modules in here. We're going to go into these in just a second, but this is where we store all of the information or data that is going to be used throughout multiple plans. The case, the suite specific data may be stored in those levels, but anything that is system-wide and used over and over is going to be stored here. And you may access this, occasionally, certainly when we start a project, but you may come back here and add additional custom functions and groups. So this is something that you'll touch occasionally here, and this is where that's located. The last module or the section here is the servers, and this is where we can monitor the responsiveness and the capabilities of the servers. This is something you shouldn't really need to do unless you're doing maintenance on the servers. This will store the list of everything that has connected or is currently active against this instance and its capabilities. And also, in the case where we need to do updates to the server, this is where the updates originate. So when we want to do an update, update or push a patch to a server, and I'll show the patching process here, those files live in this updates module here. Those get pushed out to the server. So I'll get a little bit more into detail with that in a second here too. Okay, so what configuration can we do with this platform? So the first thing we want to configure are the environments. These are definitely system-wide. I've got a lot of them in here, but really the only things that you'll need to go ahead and set up in here in your environment are the links or the URLs to each of your instances. And I try to label them the best I can so that it reflects what that instance is. If it's dev, I call it dev. If it's testing, we call it testing, and so forth there. I will just say that unless you're planning to run tests against production, I wouldn't even create that in here because I wouldn't want anyone to accidentally select that. So that's just my own preference here, but I do like to leave that out unless there's a specific need for that, and in which case I'll also name it something so that people know, hey, this is production, and you need to be careful about what you do here. The information for this is pretty straightforward. You need the URL. You absolutely need to be able to do that there. Everything else is kind of optional here. There are some additional features, and I'll point them out when we get there, that you may want to take advantage of, and those might require a service account be entered here, but it's completely optional. We don't need it. I'll point those areas out. If you're not interested in using them, then we don't need to fill this in. So really all we need is the URL and the name here. Users, same idea. The users are going to be the actual account that gets used when we start the automated test. So this, a couple of things about this here. First of all, this is not the ServiceNow test user table. This is a completely different Capio user table. And all it does is store the reference to that account with the password and encrypting it here so that you can use that in your test. By creating a user here, it does nothing to the target environment. If this user does not exist there, it will fail to log in, and it will tell you that. But so in essence, you'll need to make sure that you create the accounts, the testing accounts on the target environment that you want. Most tests will require multiple personas. So what we see as the most common practice is that we will set up a Capio admin account, and this will be the test account that people log in as and then impersonate different users throughout the test. So you're absolutely free to do whatever you want here. That's the easiest solution. It may not be the exact scenario that you want, but that's the easiest setup if you need to use different personas in a test. You can put just a regular end user in here. I would definitely recommend that even if you do that, you create a Capio account specific to that role. But you can't put a different level user in here. Just keep in mind that when you do that, that the system is going to react to what their role is. So if you force end users to a portal, or restrict access to applications, as you should with different roles, if you try to go outside of that, the test is going to fail. It's not going to be able to access admin abilities if you're just an ITIL user. So that's the trade-off. If you do that, if you create that user and you want to execute the test at that level, you got to make sure everything within the scope of that test is for that role. It's pretty straightforward, but I think sometimes people just get in the mode where they're just used to being admin and they test, and they have to readjust to using a different role in there. So whatever the case is here, the steps would be create that user on the target environment and then create the reference to that user in here, the username and password. If you have a different style of login, and you might with the single sign-on or another method, I can show you how to change the login procedure so that you use that login procedure. You can still reference these credentials if you want, but we can change the login process. So just keep that in mind here too. And the last thing about this, if you're taking notes, I would underline this one here. If you clone over your environment and it removes the account, this will fail to log in. It seems pretty obvious, but it's very easy to lose track and forget that these were a config here, and then have your test start to fail at some point because the account is gone. That's it. Other than that, there's not much to know about the test users. So test data here. Test data is the mechanism to input data to a test that is used for the entire test. We do have a mechanism on cases that allows a data-driven approach to the specific case, but test data here is basically system-wide. It's we want to input data that will be used throughout the entire test here. Some examples, some things that we've seen people want to use here: user account names. So when we're talking about that impersonation a second ago, right, you may impersonate a specific user. Users sometimes change. They change roles, they leave the org, new people get into that position. So if you hard code a user into a test, just keep in mind that, you know, if that changes for whatever reason, you would need to update those tests that reference that user. Using test data allows you to have a single point to be able to put that data in. Throughout your test, these can be used as variables in your test. So you've got this ability to affect the change or the system, the plan system-wide. These come in a few different varieties here. The first one is grid. This is the easiest one. If you've just got information, variable names, and values, this is what you want to do here. You know, you just create rows, and I can just say, hey, this is my variable, and the value is test, something like that. In your test plans, you'll be able to reference this variable, be able to use that there. The other types that we have, number one, are secure credentials. So if we need to use a username and password in a test, we obviously don't want to be typing that username and password just out in the open here. We can include secure credentials here, and this will allow us to reference that username and password and use it without actually revealing it in the code. And this stuff, that when we use secure credentials, these are never at rest on the system. They're all encrypted here. They go over the wire and they're encrypted, and they're only in memory in the target in the testing server. So this is the way to keep account names and passwords and other any other secret secure when we do a test. If that ever comes up, then you'll want to take advantage of this. The last method that I'll talk about here is the script method here, and this will basically just give us a script field in ServiceNow to create data, and you can see just a very simple test here of this functionality here. This can be anything. It can be just this JavaScript object, but if you want, you can even run a ServiceNow script in here. So if you need to gather data before the test executes and bring that into a test, you can do that here. So I could run a script here, look up a username or a catalog item name or something, and return that as part of the data here, and that will become usable in my test too. So kind of some advanced scenarios there, but if you need them, you'll be happy they're there. And that's the test data plugin there. Custom functions, I'll come back to. Scenarios, I'll show you here. There really shouldn't be much need right now for people to modify scenarios. These are used by the system in the automatic generation of test here. So I'll point this out. They're here. They have templates assigned to them. They're not being used in the interface right now. They're used in the automatic generation of tests. If you ever need to modify these, it would probably be something that we're instructing you or having you do. And I'll show you, and I would explain how to do that here. At some point, these will become public and usable templates. But right now, they're all internal. I expose it there just in case people need to modify it. But unless we're giving you that modification, I would move away from that for now. Configuration groups. So this was a newer feature. I'm not even sure if this was in the POC when we went through this, but configuration groups allow you to relate several test types together and override different values in the settings. So when we set up the plans, I'll get to this in a second here. When we set up the plans, we tell it an environment to test against. We may say, okay, test this against our dev environment. If you want to test it against other environments, you can introduce more configuration groups so that you can reuse that test without changing any of the values. This will make more sense in the second when I get onto that form there, but generally to create a configuration group, you just need to give it a name. If it does override the test environment, we can put it here. If we originally tie our test to development and we would rather them use our Madrid environment, we would make that change here. and that would be used when we execute the test. Environment setup script. This is kind of a free-form spot to run ServiceNow code here. If there's anything that we need to do to set up that environment, including, I guess, loading data or running cleanup scripts or something, this is the opportunity to do that here. Even in some of the more advanced scenarios, I've done things in here like create Amazon virtual machines, EC2 instances, and use those for the tests. So it's pretty flexible. Hopefully the environments are pretty close to what they need to be when you run the test. And if you're doing this continuously, they will be. But if there's anything that needs to happen before the test starts for the setup of this environment, this is the opportunity to do that here. And lastly, in the configs are of course, the system property settings here. Most of this here should stay static here. The two that I'll point out are the two bottom ones here. For Case Creator and Test Designer, these are two new features that we rolled out with the last update. And I'm going to show you these here when we get into the plan setup here. But they have functionality in there that will look at workflows and transactions in the system. Depending on the usage of the system, there can be hundreds of thousands or millions of those transactions. To limit the time that those take and to make that UI a little bit more responsive, you can alter this value here. This will affect everyone, so please be careful. I've put as low as 25 records in here and as much as 100, and that seems to be the range for this, but this is where that's configured here. Okay, perfect. All right, let's move into the fun stuff now here. So the test repository. So as I've kind of already started to mention here, this is organized into 3 levels. Plans, which contain the high-level setup for a test. The suites, which are the groups of cases, and those are directly underneath the plans. And cases, which are the actual units that do the automation, and those roll up to a specific suite there. Underneath plans, when we go to create this here, if I'm looking at a plan, if I look at the plan record here, we'll see here's all the basic information at the top. This is what we need in order to be able to start the test. We need to know what capability we're going to use. So, for Capio, we have multiple capabilities on the back end, different things that we can do to execute a test. The functional test here uses Selenium to execute these tests here. So that's the most common thing that people want to do. They want to log in with the browser and do some actions inside ServiceNow. We have other modules in here. Performance and system compare were kind of 2 extra utilities there, and they do have their use. That's very uncommon. The one other one that may be interesting to you is the unit test module, and this executes a test in a completely different way. This is used to run ServiceNow server-side code, and the purpose of that was to really get at units or functions within ServiceNow at that unit level. I can show some examples of that. This has a very specific purpose. If we're wanting to test things like, I'm sorry, there's loud street racers outside my house here. If you're wanting to test things like script includes or integrations to run code in script's background, that's what this is for. This is not for I want to do an end-to-end test or test a client script or something. This has a very specific purpose there. So yeah, if you have any of those needs, we can get there. If we want to talk about this more, I would wait till our last training session. We can bring it up there, and I can show some examples of what that looks like. But I did want you to be wondering what that was. So these 2 are the most common ones that we'll see, and we're looking at other capabilities to bring in here as well. We'd like this, to be able to use this interface for more types of testing. The application here, of course, we're interested in testing ServiceNow, and right at this point, because it is Selenium on the back end, we do have the ability to go to another application. So if you do have homegrown apps, especially things that integrate with ServiceNow, this might be a good path to use to start that integration or use that other third-party system. You can actually do that within a ServiceNow test. So if I'm in the middle of a ServiceNow test, if I want, I can leave ServiceNow. I can go to Jira, for instance, create a ticket in Jira, and just for the purposes of seeing that it integrates with ServiceNow, I can definitely do that. The main difference between these two is if you use Basic, you won't get any of the ServiceNow specific commands. It's just a blank slate, just the core Selenium functions. So for right now, I think we're going to just focus on leaving it in ServiceNow. Version is kind of self-explanatory here. We want to select the target version that we are testing against. I hope you don't have a Kingston instance lying around, and hopefully nothing before that, but you can see it does go up through Orlando, and to toggle between the environments, you just change it here. It's as simple as that. By changing this, you're telling the server, the backend, to use this version of the API when we run this test. And there are differences between these. If I'm on a Madrid instance and I try to use the Orlando version, it'll probably fail. Things like the navigation and the interface differ between these versions, and that can definitely cause a test to fail. Some functions may be the same, so you may get some passes, but generally you want it to match there. You want those things to be the same. You don't need to do anything about these versions here. Cerna does all the maintenance, so whenever I'm not sure what P will be, but whenever the next instance is that comes out, we do that maintenance and we'll release it. As soon as we get a version here, you'll get it on your instance, and hopefully it's right around the time you're going to start doing that testing. We're in the beta program, so we get it very early. It usually takes us about 2 weeks to do the modifications, and then we send it out to customers. Default test user and default test environment. We already showed the config of these. This is where they're specified. If nothing else changes these values in a configuration or in another setting here, this is what will be used to execute the test. So yeah, that's where those are defined. Assignment group here. This was really just a way to give some ownership of the test plan to a specific group here. I don't really know anyone using this. I left it in there because it was a legacy feature, but really no one's using that right now. So unless you care about having a name to a plan, I wouldn't worry about that one here. Last run, last result. These are kind of self-explanatory. These show what the last run and result were. This one doesn't have any execution, so it's showing blank right here. But if there was an execution, the status will show here. And this is, from a list point and a reporting point, it's nice to be able to see the health of these tests as we go along. Obviously, we're looking to see all passed for everything there. That's what we want to see for that. Okay, very good. Let's talk a little bit about the advanced configuration here. So beyond the plan, so you'll see that this has got a lot of the information here. It doesn't have everything that we need though. Some things, in some cases we want to have additional configurations here, and to store that information, we have that moved to a related list here, what we call test configurations, and this will store the rest of the pieces of information that are needed to execute the test. And again, putting them here gives us the ability to add multiple of these. And really, what we're talking about at the most basic level is the browser name, right? We wouldn't want to specify the browser name at the test plan level because then we're locked into one browser. We want multiple configurations here. So for that, that's why we've created this as a related list here. And when you first create the test, a default configuration will be created for you. We just kind of default it to Chrome because that's what most people use for the development, at least for development purposes. The other thing I can tell you about the API or the framework that we built is we take into account in all of the functions the differences between the different browsers. So we try to the extent that we can, we try to hide those disparities between the browsers in the functions. So you don't need to change the timing or anything in there between IE and Chrome. We've handled most of that for you. You just need to just identify the browser that you want to use. So you can, those are two of the properties that you can set here. You can, if I haven't really had anyone need to get to this level yet, but if you wanted to, you could also tell it a specific platform and release. You could say, I want to use, I think it's like this. I want to use Windows and I want to use the, for whatever reason, we want to use the 7.1 or something. If you have multiple specifications for hardware that your end users use, and there's a difference between those, you can get down to this level. I haven't seen it, because we're relying mostly on the browser, and those are pretty static across different versions. But for what it's worth, that's there. That's there and something you can configure too. And in that case, the execution of this test or this specific configuration would have to happen on a Windows 7.1 machine, and you can lock it in there. If you leave it blank, it will use whatever's available. Like this setup here is saying, use any Chrome instance that we have available. No, we don't care about the version or the platform or release here. And this one might come up here, and I definitely see people use this for the purposes of development and testing. If you want, you can tie a test to a specific server. So this is something here, and if you want to do that, all you need to do is specify in there the server host name. So I think mine is something like desktop sal, something like that. The server name that you specify here, that if you specify that, this server must run this configuration. You can have multiple configurations, so you can spread it out across different servers. But if I do that, that will lock it in here. Only this server will execute it. If this is not available, the test won't execute and will eventually expire, and we'll move on to other things. But we can lock it into that there. There's a separate feature here under servers. We may have saw it when we looked in here. Let me pull up a separate browser here. Let's see. So if I specify this in here, this is going to say that only this test can execute only this server can execute this configuration of this test. But that doesn't mean that the server can't execute other tests. It just means that this one will wait for this server. If we want to create that relationship there, where this test is only linked to, this server is only linked to tests that it can execute, there is a checkbox here in server called exclusive mode. And when this is enabled, this server will only execute tests that are assigned to it. And this is very helpful for debugging purposes. If you want to run a test and see it on the server, for instance, you can create that relationship and lock that in. Otherwise, the first server that's available is going to pick it up. And sometimes that's not what people want. They want to be able to see it and lock it in. So this exclusive mode can be enabled. And again, I see that for development purposes. When you're done, just be sure to disable this. If you don't, it will continually be locked in there, and you may not be able to. You'll see when you go to execute test, but it will give you a warning saying no servers are available. And I'll show you what that looks like too. So those are the configurations. And the last thing here, I guess, is to point out is that you can assign this to a group. Those groups that we mentioned before. If I want to bundle all of those configurations into a specific environment, I can do that with these groups. Because I may have, again, you may have more than one. You may have more than one configuration per test. You may want to do Chrome and IE and Firefox on a test. If you do that and you want to group them together, that's what those groups are for. The only other thing I'll mention here, we do have what we call user-defined capabilities. This was kind of a legacy feature too. I don't really have anyone using this, but the purpose of this function was to add more dimensions beyond these fields here to qualify a server for a test. So in this scenario here, I could define a key and a value on a server and require that to be used to execute a test. So I could say, only use my server in North America or South America to execute this test, and those could be user defined. It's very advanced, and I think most people are just happy with the default setup, so they never went and used those there. So a few other optional configs here to point out, and let's get into the suites here. Triggers are our mechanism to start the test here. You can always do it manually. You can always come in here and execute a test manually, but if you want to schedule the running of the test or have any event start the test here, that's what a trigger would be used for. For the first phase here, right, we're just starting to get to know the system and we're just starting to create the test. I probably wouldn't create the triggers right away unless you're just trying to test that functionality. I usually wait towards the end of the development of the test once I'm ready to implement it and move it to production to add a trigger here. But the setup is pretty straightforward here. We'll want to give it a name. So this is let's say this is my nightly run. I want to select the occurrence of this. And again, if it's a daily, something I want to run daily here, then I've got my daily trigger here. And then I want to specify the hour or the time that this runs at. The only thing here that's important is when you set this up, this view here is in your time zone. So if your time zone differs from the system time zone, the behavior can be a little bit weird here. It's gonna create an offset of that time, and it may not run exactly at the time you want. So you can either experiment with it, or what I find is the easiest thing is just temporarily match your time zone to the system time zone when you set this. That way, this will be at the exact time you specify. If I want this to run at, let's say 2200 hours here, that's what I would put there. If I'm on the East Coast, this would end up running at 8 p.m. Server time. So it's a little bit weird. I'm trying to find a way to at least inform the user about that difference here, but just keep that in mind. Whatever you do here, make sure that it ends up in the system time. Otherwise, it may run earlier or later than you're expecting here. Perfect. Okay, so just to round up on the triggers here, the other half of the trigger here are some advanced configs. If we want to run a specific configuration group, we can specify that here. Otherwise, it will use the default group. If we want to delay the start of a test, we can do that here. And the reason you may want to do that is if there's a workflow or some application that has a time built into the workflow, you may want to do that. For instance, if you wanted to validate an SLA breached at the specific time it was supposed to, you could start, you could run a portion of the test, have it create the record to which that SLA is attached, and then run the second half of it, 3 hours later, and check that SLA was breached. So anything like that, we've got the ability to kind of break it up and create a delay in there. If you want to join two tests together, that again is a trigger type here. We can say that when a specific test completes, that we want to start the next portion of that test there. So you can create those pipelines. If you just run everything at once, it will enter a queue and they'll be executed in order of which they were started. But if you want to tightly control the consecutive nature of the test here, then you can create these links here, and that will control them, so that one starts after another. If you have the scenario, you can even move information forward from the test. Typically, when the test ends, the shared context or all the variables for that suite are they're gone. It just ends. They're deleted. If you want, you can move that information forward with this carry context forward. It will take those variables and it will insert them as data in the next test. So if you create a record here and you want to use it here, you can carry that context forward. And especially with that instance where we want to validate the SLA, we need to know the specific record. And that's how we can chain those things together there. Advanced condition is just what it sounds. It will control whether or not this test executes whatever you return here. If you return false, it won't execute. So this is again an opportunity to script with ServiceNow script here some check to see if we want to run the test, and this may pair with the update set and give some more information. But yeah, this will definitely control that there. The suites, again, just what it sounds. If we want to just pick out specific suites from this test to execute, that can be controlled here as well. We may not want to run everything in one go. We may just want to run specific ones, so we can control that there. Otherwise, everything will execute. So those are the triggers. Those are the setup there. Again, probably come at those towards the end there. Data sets is a very simple one here. If the data sets that we create under the config are many-to-many, if we want to use that here, we would just specify that here. Just say create that link between the plan and the data, and now that data will be available when this test executes. Notifiers, I don't want to get too deep into these because these will be, this will be a little bit more advanced config, but generally these are the other end of the triggers here. This is what happens when a test completes. So I haven't got anyone that's got this far to actually send information back to Jenkins, but in theory, Jenkins can consume an artifact and include that in its results. So we could say, when our test completes, we want to do some action here. We want to send an email. That's the most common one. We may want to do a REST or SOAP type integration, or you may want to run a script in ServiceNow. The sending the email, again, that's the most common here. If it's common, we've got a basic template for it. Actually, for email, we've got kind of an advanced one and a basic one. So we have these things kind of pre-packaged here, and you would just configure them. If you want to do an integration with a third-party system, again, that's possible here. We do have this in this REST message here, and in which case we can set up the config, and then the body of the message here to send this off to another third-party system. And I'm thinking about Jenkins now because you said it, but I'm pretty sure that there are common test result artifacts that it can consume, and it would just be a matter of sending that or getting that information along to Jenkins, and then it would appear in its dashboard there as well. No matter what you set up here, the testing of this or the verification of this can be a pain. Because I'm sorry, but I was limited on what I could do on the server side as far as templating. So I created this as a jelly field here. So to preview or to see this in action here, I've actually created this preview here, and this will allow you to see what the results of this would be for a specific record. So, just for the purposes of testing this and verifying that your code is good here, I've got this preview here that will allow you to preview it, and then the test will actually fire it off and send it. So that does exist here. And then the last piece here that I'll mention here, the last setup, and I'm sorry, this takes a while, but the rest of the stuff goes pretty quick here. The last thing to mention here are the frameworks. And this is a way to include additional functionality in the test. As I mentioned with the application, we will get all of the core Selenium functions and then all of the Cerna created ServiceNow functions. But there are other ones that we've created as well. Right now, the additional frameworks that we have are one for sending REST messages. So if we want to do that REST type command from within a ServiceNow test, we've got that ability. We can just fire off a REST command in there. That's great for third-party integrations or testing ServiceNow endpoints. We have an email functionality, and this will allow us to send email to the system. Not something we can typically do, but if you want to validate inbound email actions or something like that, we can use this mailer to send email. This will require some additional setup on your side. Frankly, there are other alternatives for inbound email if that's your goal, but this will allow us to send a mail. And the last one here was for HashiCorp Vault. This was a password and secrets management solution. And I don't know if you implement it in your organization, but the main takeaway here is that if you have another third-party application or another system or another type of validation that you want to do, we can probably accommodate it. We can go beyond Selenium to include other commands to be able to execute these things. So just some other examples of things that customers were interested in. Obviously Vault, and we went ahead and made that an official framework, but things like Jira, managing certificates in the system because they had certificate-based authentication, things like that, SQL, validating a SQL database, stuff like that are all things that we can build frameworks for. And if it helps your ServiceNow test, then I'm interested in it. If it's useful for more people beyond your group, then I would probably make it an official framework and expose it like this. But it can go beyond this. If you hit a wall and you say, oh man, I wish I could just open this Excel file, let me know, because that may be something that you can actually do. We just need to provide a command for it. So that's the frameworks there. Let's see, what else do we need to talk about on this form here? The execution of tests. So to do that, it's just this execute test link here. If there are no servers, oh, this one does have a server. So by clicking that, it will queue this test. And if there's a server, it's going to tell us here, Capio server is online, and we'll execute this test. We'll see it. So it's already jumped to queued here. So we'll start to execute this test. If there are no servers online, it will give you an error message here. It'll just tell you, hey, there's nothing that can execute this, and you will need to check that the servers are active. If servers are active, we need to just make sure, hey, that we've not tied this to a specific server by accident or had that exclusive mode on or something like that. The other links here, this one here, I mean, for what it's worth, yeah, I've made some advancements here, but I still left this in the product here. Open Navigator will open the test plan in this sort of tree view here, and the point of this was to kind of quickly navigate between the different records here. I've added new features here that kind of make this pointless, but some people really like this feature. I don't know why, but some people really like this and like that view there, but that's what that link does. If you click it and it's there, yeah, that it will add it there. If you don't like it, just refresh it and it will go away and we'll come back here. But that's what that button does there. ServiceNow was very concerned that I was able to take over this menu, but hey, we needed it at one point. Execute configuration group will execute a specific group here. If I have groups defined, it will, that's what I want to use to define to execute that specific group manually. The execute test will only do the default one. So that's the difference between those two. If I want to do a specific group, I can specify that there. Export plan. As before, I mentioned that there was an ability to move tests between different environments. That's what this is here. These files here, these suites and cases, all the configuration here do not get captured in update sets. This was a specific decision that we made because there were some issues with adding this or making these records get captured in an update set. So that was not something that we enabled, but as it turns out, this is a much better solution here, because when you click this button, first of all, you don't need to be worried about whether or not you're in the right update set. But when you click this button, this will actually execute everything as it is, or sorry, export everything as it is, including all of the config tables and attachments at this point in time. So by clicking this, it exports everything related to this test, all of those things I mentioned, all of the configs will all be bundled up here in one shot, and that's an XML file that can be imported in the other environment. So this is, again, I say it's better than an update set because this ensures that you do not miss anything that would might have been missed in an update set. So that does exist there. If you want to do the entire system, if you want to export everything and take out between two different systems, for instance, if you're developing and you want to move everything at once, you can go, and this is something, I didn't put it as a link because you'll see it. It takes a second here. You can do, oh my goodness, I forget the link here. I'll have to remind myself of the exact link there. Anyways, there's the ability to export everything, all of the plans, all of the suites and cases, all of the config at once. And again, that was a one-time thing just to be able to move between two environments. So that does exist here. I didn't expose it as this. I may actually put it on the settings screen there. But that's if we need to do that, then we have that ability too. Okay, so the suites, again, those are those groups for those test plans here. By default, there's not much configuration that you'll need to do here. It will automatically relate the plan or relate to the plan here. You can add a suite to multiple plans. So if you want to reuse this between different plans, that's perfectly fine too. The state here will determine whether or not this actually gets executed here. If for some reason you want to deactivate the test here, you should move it to a draft state. This basically says this is here where you don't want to delete it, but we also don't want to execute it. That's what that state would be for. Active is the only other state we use. We don't use skip right now, but active is active and will be executed here. Last result, same as the suite or plan. This will show you the last actual result of this suite. And the run as account here is our option to override that default user. So if I want to, for the most part, I want to run all the suites with one particular user, but for this one, I wanted to change it and run it to this user, I can override that here, put that in here too. So that's really all there is about this one here. The other fields here, again, owner was just a way to tie a user name to the suite. Doesn't actually have any workflow or anything around that. So underneath here, the cases is where we start to get into the interesting things here. And the case here is where the actual work goes, right? This has some setup at the top here. Again, the number, the name, all the description fields are here. This has a state, just the same as the suite. It does have one additional state, which is review. And in a review state, this is basically active, but this is just saying that there may be some additional work we need to manually look at on this record. So draft is off, active is on, review is on, but hey, there might be something here. And then inactive is off. And probably in this case, we probably intend to delete it or deprecate this test at some point. So I'll leave it inactive here. Source is not really used anymore here. I'll show you why in a second, but this is the ability to tie a case to one other specific tasks type record in ServiceNow, a story or something. That's what this record was, this field was for there. I keep it again because it's legacy, but I'll show you in a second test case sources, which is a much better solution for this here. Order does matter, and if you leave this blank, it will just pick up the next order that's available. If you want to change the way that these tests execute, then this order can be changed. You can insert and move these tests around that way. That's what that field is about. But those are the boring things. We want to get to the fun stuff here, the scripting here. So this is what the script fields look like here. It's organized into 3 phases. We have a setup or run before. We have the main body of the script, which is the script field, and then we have a kind of a cleanup or after phase called run after. The before and after are optional. You don't need to have these as part of the test here. Sometimes it makes sense to have the setup and cleanup separate, and if you do want to put something in there, as soon as you start typing in there, it will enable it, and you can turn this on or off depending on what you want to do before the test. The script field will then run. This always executes here. And then, of course, the after is the same deal as the before. If we have something in here and we have it enabled, it will execute here. So why the three phases here? Well, in most cases here, if we're just running a single test, the before and after don't matter too much here. It is nice to be able to move these and keep them separate, because if we want to reuse these, then it makes sense to, to be able to just quickly have these separate and be able to copy and paste this. But the other thing is that for these tests here, we can actually specify data that we want to use within the test here. And that's done on this data tab here. And it's what we call a data-driven test. And kind of the same idea. When this is enabled here, we can add or specify data for this test that will become variables in our test. So just using, like this one isn't, let's jump over to a better example. Let's jump here. In our test here, I've got 3 actions that we do. It's not really important that you know what this does, although I think you'll probably figure it out by the name here. But in this case here, we're going to a form, we're going to the incident form, and we want to set some values in here. Now, normally I can just come in here and say, you know what, set this to 1 high, whatever the value is that I want to do. I can hard code this in here. And that will work just fine. But if I want to as well, I can use that data-driven test, and I can replace that with a variable. And what will happen is when this test goes to execute here, the data that's specified on this tab will cause this test to run multiple times for each data set here. So in this scenario here, we've got 3 columns: impact, urgency, and priority. And these become the variables in my test here. Impact becomes CTX, impact, urgency, and priority. Same idea there. The rows become an execution of this test. So in this scenario, this would run 2 times, 1 for each row. And then the cells in these rows become the value of those variables. So in this way, I can repeat that test over and over, and without having to copy and paste this test multiple times. The reason the before and after are important here is because the script field will run multiple times for each of that data. The before and after will only run once. So in this case here, I do my navigation or my setup once before. There's no cleanup, but if I did, it would put it here. And then the script field can run multiple times. Not that it makes a huge difference here, but I don't have to do the navigation multiple times in this script. So I can, and it just does the main portion of the script over and over, and it wasn't relevant that the form did not need to be reloaded. So I saved that time here. Not such a big deal for 2 rows, but if I had 25 rows here, that starts to add up. That navigation takes a few seconds each time, and that can be minutes on my execution. So you can kind of extrapolate that out. We can end up saving some good amount of time here by having these be separate there. So that's why they're separate. And if you're not doing a data-driven test, if this is off, the script, the before and after, it just runs before and after this. So honestly, you could even take this and make this be part of this field, and it would execute just the same. Doesn't really have any distinction there between those. The Bdd tab, I said I would mention this here. This is where this is defined. Again, I don't think we're targeting on using this here, but in this scenario, when I develop a test here, instead of coming and scripting this, coming in here and scripting this manually here, I can enable this Bdd test. And what I would do here is basically define the criteria for the test in this format here. And when I save this test, it will generate the code based on code that has already been developed for these phrases here. So this works very, very well in a world where there are business analysts and business process consultants developing the tests that do not have coding abilities here. But the kind of the downfall is that unless everyone is contributing to this method here, it doesn't really work. All the developers would need to be focused on writing automation for these phrases, and the business analysts would need to be the ones defining these steps here. So while it does work, this can work here, and if everyone was contributing towards it, it can work out pretty well. Sometimes the separation of duties are such that this is not effective for us. So that's why I say, if everyone is on board, or if there's a whole group using it, then you might get more use out of it. But if it's not, then I'd say probably the other methods that I'm going to show you are much better for creating these scripts here. Conditions, I won't get too much into this here. Most of these are not really necessary anymore. The environment here, which we had as a condition, is probably better used with a configuration instead. So we don't really have that anymore. These three checkboxes here might be relevant. The test here, if you're creating a series of cases that are dependent on one another, these checkboxes here can help enforce that all of the test cases pass here. Most of the time, if you're running a series of cases and the first one fails, the second one, third one, and fourth one are going to fail anyways. But in this case here, it would just immediately fail really the whole test and just exit if I have something like this here. If it doesn't, the other tests are going to continue to execute and probably fail on their own. But that's what these three checkboxes here will do, just what they say. Advanced include and execute conditions here. These are our options to include or disinclude this test at execution time and at runtime here. These are very advanced. I haven't seen anyone need to actually come in here. I think I was just showing off by putting these in here. If a test does not need to be included, I'd probably deactivate it. If a test needs to be conditionalized at runtime, you can use this, but you can also just as easily put conditions in the script here. So that's why I say probably people are not going to need those too much there. One other thing to just to show you real quick here at the suite level. Let's see if I can find one with a bunch. All right, Apple iPhone here. There is, I don't have any cases here. There is this function here, Reorder Cases. And if you do this, all this will do is it will go through the order of all the cases and just set the spacing correctly between them. Sometimes if you're inserting cases and moving them along, you'll start to get cases that are right up against each other in the order. It does space them out by 100 here. So clicking that button will just set all of the orders appropriately so that you've got nice space in between them. So in case you need to insert new ones in the future, that's what that button there is doing. Attach suite or execute suite here is going to execute just this suite. If you do it at the plan level, it will execute the whole plan. If you run it here at the suite level, it will just do this suite. Super helpful or super important for when I'm developing one suite at a time there. So just to go back here, now there's one other feature here I must show you here before we get to the end of it, and it's the test designer feature. So for the first, for right now, I think we're kind of just really developing and playing with the solution here. So for most people, I would probably set up the plan manually, but to use some of these advanced features, we'll have to go through a test designer here. And the setup for this, or what this tool will do, is basically do that setup that we did in the plan manually for us in kind of an automatic way. So all of the information that I specified there, the application, the version, all the other fields and everything will be set for me here. What is important about this one is that for develop with Test Designer, they will have a specific type. And that type will allow us to automatically create tests later. So again, for the developing and learning, I don't want to do this, but when we go to actually implement some of these things here, we're going to be following a strategy, and we're not going to want to start out at 0. We want to start to generate some of these things. So to use this, again, we'll just fill out these values. We'll select the test type. We've got 3: unit, catalog item, and end-to-end, which are kind of the same thing here. They're just different interfaces here. End-to-end will do an application or workflow end-to-end test. Unit will be the individual configs. Catalog item will test a catalog item. And I want to get through this just so I can show you what the next phase looks like here, which is the case creator. But we'll have to specify all the plan details, all the same information that we did at the plan level here. But here's where it gets different, the suite setup here. In this case here, I can start to import records. And what case creator will do in the next step here is it will try to reverse engineer, or from the transactions, it will reverse the process from an application or look at a workflow and generate the cases for me. So in all the tests and everything here, we you know, in some cases when it's free form, we know what we want to do and we want to implement that. But if you follow our methodology, we have a specific flow that we recommend customers use, and this will develop towards that flow here. So I'll just pick this incident one here, for example. Additional settings are all those configs and optional things here. But now the last step, I'll be asked to create this plan. You'll see it will create everything that I had before, and it will create this, this container here for this test suite. The next thing I want to do here, when I come in here, you'll see the cases are empty here. To continue that setup here, we'll run case creator here, and we'll see for this particular application and that record that we imported, it found one transaction, found the create, the first record or the setup for this record, and there it just found that we were going to set a few fields and then save it. I can show the code here. That's what it will look like. When I click create cases, it will go ahead and actually create those for me with that code. So from an incident that we created manually, we're now able to generate that whole flow there, all that information. And again, that will work for most record types in the system there, and workflows as well. So this was the same one here. Just want to show you what a workflow will look like here so you get the idea of what it can actually import. Here's a service catalog item, same idea. If I go into my case creator, we'll see the request here, and it knows all of the properties and information from there, but then all of the steps as part of the workflow. If I create these cases here, this will be a much more full test plan here, but we can see we get all of those cases in here will be that code. So for starting off, this is where we want to start. We don't want to start with nothing. We want to start with generating our cases and then tweaking these to our needs here. Otherwise, all the other docs here, we've got the install and user guides there. Those might be helpful here. The getting started user guide here, and I apologize, the font is very light here. There is a getting started guide, which will walk you through like your first test case. We've got how-to articles, so when I get interesting questions in, I try to respond to those, not only to the support queue question, but I try to write an article to these as well. So some of the advanced stuff we'll find in here, and this is always growing, so everything that comes in, I try to add it to our, or me or my team will try to add it to the knowledge base here. But this is everything.
Perfect. Can you go ahead and click on that support center link right there on the top?
Mm-hmm.
So should you ever see, because we do use Jira for our virtual admin as well, so if you do see this screen right here, go ahead and click on the middle option where it says cap your support, and that when you click on that, that should take you to that list of documentation right there. And if you go down to the bottom, scroll down a little bit where it says need to raise a request, so this is where you would want to go if you want to submit a ticket. If you have any issues with you want technical support, or if there may be a defect you're experiencing, or if you want to suggest an enhancement, this is where you would kind of fill out all the details accordingly, and then we will receive it on our end and confirm the ticket and respond accordingly as well.
And while we're in here too, I just mentioned this too because I've seen other customers do this, and in the interest of getting you the response as quickly as possible, when you're logging a ticket here, if you tell us the version of ServiceNow you're testing that you're trying to test against, that will help in here. And if you're using a test here, keep in mind we can't see your instance. So if you're referring to a test, we won't be able to see it. So if you've got code you want to bring in, you should bring that code in here as well. You feel free to take a screenshot of it, and that will help too. But if you've got the code, exactly what you're trying to do here, this will help us to reproduce the issue quicker if there is an issue, and this will get us, help us get a response to you quicker. So definitely the instance name and then the script that you're using here will help us along getting things resolved quickly.